Hi, everybody. I'm Anish Anderia. I work with the Wildlife Conservation Trust. Today, along with my colleagues from the Conservation Behavior Vertical, I join you to discuss one of the most fascinating projects that WCT has commissioned in the past 1.5 years. Uh, this is a great amalgamation of research, statistics, psychology, conservation biology, and economics. Um, this becomes one of the, I would say, the cornerstones of the kind of stuff that has happened in the Wildlife Conservation Trust in the last 5 years, actually. Um, we are very keen on the interactions between humans and wildlife and have been working in the Brahmapuri division for nearly 8 years now. We have also carried out a lot of camera trapping studies there to understand the movement patterns and distributions of tigers. Um, we have done multiple surveys, so we are actually also eventually going to understand the demography, which means what are the turnovers, how are tigers from Brahmapuri intermingling with tigers of the Tadoba Tiger Reserve. Brahmapuri is to the east of Tadoba Andhari Tiger Reserve. In fact, it is contiguous with that tiger reserve, and together, Tadoba and Brahmapuri form one of the most robust um, tiger populations in central India. By robust, I mean there are enough breeding females in the entire population um, that will be able to withstand some amount of disturbance, uh, some amount of anthropogenic disturbance. However, this particular division is also replete with very high density of people. There are nearly close to 610 villages in the Brahmapuri division. The division itself is about 1,200 square kilometers. Um, so you are looking at a forest area which has very high density of large carnivores, that is both tigers and leopards, but also has very high density of human beings. So when we started our work there, we realized that people living in these areas are doubly marginalized. They are dependent on the forests for their daily subsistence. A lot of their fuel wood comes from the forests that are close to their villages. And these are the forests which are also um, loaded with large carnivores. So when we went in, the team started looking at this landscape piece by piece to understand how the tigers um, were distributed, to understand the kind of dependence that there was, and all this happened over the last 1.5 years. So this particular discussion that I'm having with my team is about the strategy that was built in this very, I would say, very diverse group of people. So they were all approaching the pole star, which is conservation of large landscapes, but through their own independent but scientific lenses. So it brings me my immense pleasure to have this discussion. You would have already seen a 7-minute film that was made on the water heaters that have been introduced in this landscape. So through this discussion, I want to let the audience know how conservation projects can be strategized so that we can aim for a win-win, both from the perspective of people who live alongside wild animals and the conservation of large carnivores, which is one of the most challenging things, if you ask me, on this planet today. So let's get on with the discussion. So from the camera trapping work that we've done over several seasons, we know that within the Brahmapuri Forest Division, which are the areas where the forest quality is good, where the degradation is at its minimum, and they are in sizable, basically, because these are the areas where because the disturbance is low, The interaction between large carnivores and people is minimum. There are also some breeding areas for these carnivores. And so, from the point of view of human animal interaction, these are not really the hotspots. But our studies also showed that there are some areas where the forest is badly degraded. These are also because of the availability of water all throughout the year, because there are a lot of man-made tanks. So there is water all throughout the year. These are also areas which are frequented by tigers. Because the degradation is high and tiger densities are also uh, reasonably good, these are the areas where the interaction between livestock and tigers is very high, because the wild prey densities have dropped, but the livestock densities are very good because a lot of these villages keep livestock. They have largely cows, but some of them also have buffaloes. There are also goats. And so these are areas where a very high number of, or relatively higher number of domestic cattle are being killed by tigers. There is a very good data set by the forest department collected over the last 10 years to from where we know now which are those areas where attack on cattle has been maximum. From our camera trap data, we know where tiger densities are good. So we have used multiple layers to understand that the pinch points in this landscape, which means those areas where human density and tiger densities are high, if interventions are not done, if people are still dependent on the forest for their subsistence, they are bound to come in contact with wild animals, and there is a high probability that these people will get impacted negatively by it. So I will now pull in my colleagues one by one, because these guys have gone in and actually looked at this issue from several perspectives. So my first question is to Aniket. Hi, Aniket. Um, Aniket, you have spent several months in this landscape. You are an economist. So when you went there for the first time, what what is it that you found very, very striking about it from the economics, also from the perspective of economics, and also um, how could you decipher that this area can metamorphose into a highly problematic location if we don't intervene right now?
Thank
And
you, Anish.
what are those different things that you did? What are the questions that you wanted to ask so that you can have your fingers on the pulse of the situation that's panning out there? Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Anish. Thank you for the question. So, in fact, as you pointed out several things, so I actually, for the first time when I went to the landscape, I went with the our camera trapping team. So I've actually visited it with our biologists, actually camera trapping the area. I also happened to visit some rehabilitated villages and look at, various like different economic scenarios, and then particularly the villages in Brahmapuri, which are unique in themselves. So just like you were talking about varying tiger densities, there are varying human densities and varying like variation in their identity, their economic well-being, and within people. So how did these problems be highlighted? So scientifically, it was obviously our large data set that were already pulled in by the time I became involved in this. That we had a lot of camera trapping data, up to 3 to 4 years of camera trapping data, apart from the satellite data that was already analyzed. So those two data sets were the foundational layers in terms of data. That then allowed us to, as you say, highlight specific areas that we started with pilots, where we actually visited the landscape and kind of began with actually interacting with the people. So because as we say that there's a like we can highlight areas with the data, but it is the perception of the people that will account for, because the interaction is extremely high because of the sheer densities. But then in certain areas it will flare up. And what are these factors that become highlighted? What are the factors that lead to people going into the forest? You're talking about nearly 3 tigers per 100 square kilometers. So the fact that these people continue to go to the forest despite those risks shows that there was an extremely high demand for this activity. So what are the the underlying factors for this demand? That was our approach. The amazing part was that we didn't we didn't begin the rollout began a year and a half ago, as you say, when the program was finalized. But we actually began 3 years, exactly 3 years before that, and we spent quite a lot of time actually not having a particular solution in mind. So we had particular problems that our biologist data had highlighted, which was basically the unsustainable demand for firewood, fuel wood. So and the our goal was to kind of look at the structure of this demand and the drivers of this demand to look at how this demand could be addressed. So that was our approach to this problem.
Can you throw some light on? I don't think we have a lot of time, but I still think that the audience would want to know that how, what is the socioeconomics of this place? If you want to know what is the per capita income, why is there so much and Brahmapuri per se is not very far from Nagpur. Uh, so what is it that drives people in the forests? And also, a second part to this question is that why is it that despite so much of dependence on the forest, you still have a large number of carnivores in this area? Because there are so many other landscapes in India where human densities are comparable, and in most of these areas, large carnivores have virtually disappeared. So, what is it that is unique about this landscape? I think that's very important for the audience to understand.
So, of course, my colleagues would be able to highlight further from their qualitative analysis. But in terms of the quantitative data, one of the key aspects of this area is that, it's what I would call a peri-urban landscape in some ways. So, as you say, Brahmapuri itself and Sindhevai and like other these small towns. So these villages are actually getting attached to the smaller towns, and their consumption is due to go up. So one of the key analysis that we did was we actually compared the impact of incomes on firewood, because a lot of emphasis is laid on income generation activities, and one of our key emphasis was to project what would happen when incomes actually go up. So when these activities actually fructify, or with overall GDP growth in India, the incomes in these areas are going to go up. And so to predicting what these higher incomes would mean for the forest was a critical element. And what it turns out is that in their current uh, level of development, it is predicted that as the incomes will keep going up, the demand for firewood will keep going up. There's a theory that which is the environmental Kuznets curve, which says that as incomes would go up, the demand on the environment will go down. But in the current income levels that we see them, which would be in nominal terms, around 4,000 rupees per capita on an average, if you exclude outliers, it would be very difficult for them to actually live using these forest products, and that would mean that the demand will be going up. And that is why it was critical that you address this demand and address this inequity, because there is a sense of injustice. They do believe that they pay the cost for environmental protection, whereas they don't get any benefit out of it. So these are the key psychosocial factors, along with the income. So and as the incomes would go up, they will become more pronounced. So that was the tendencies that we were up against. So, and those were the factors that one needed to address. The good part was that the same urban aspiration that was going to drive the consumption up would also mean that they will have an aspirational lifestyle. And that is how then the intervention started shaping up, because we realized that that was the key element. A mixer, or even an LCD TV in some of the homes was something that they would invest on. So we realized that they will invest on the right set of things if it appealed to some of the factors that they care for. And that is how then the intervention was designed, and uh, we went about going intervening.
Okay, so I think at this point it will be good to bring in Pooja Devulkar. Uh, Pooja, welcome. We I think it is important to understand that when a research team goes in and when you are looking at a landscape, you are not going in with a preconceived notion of pushing an idea. So how do you go about analyzing data so that you come up with a solution that the data throws at you rather than trying to fit something that already is in your head? So it's not easy. Invariably, you tend to see what you want to see. So what is it that was done so that we can sift through this huge data set? And when I say huge, I would also want you to explain to people the magnitude of data that was collected, and how what was the approach so that you uh, actually can pinpoint the rate limiting factor, which means what is it that needs which is extremely urgent, and so what is it that WCT should get involved in, because WCT obviously is a NGO. There is always limitations of funds. We cannot also do very large scale projects unlike government. And so how do you look at data and then figure out that which is that intervention that will have the maximum return on effort? So also make sure that you simplify what you're saying, because most of these people who are listening to us may not be from either economics or statistics, and so it's a challenge to explain certain things, but try your level best to do so.
So, Anish, like you mentioned, as a social scientist, when you go out in the field and when you want to understand a household's unit economics, the possibilities are endless. You want to measure absolutely each and everything that you can and get data on each and every variable as much as possible so that your understanding is as close to accuracy as it can get. But however, knowing limitations of funds, of time, and of how much effort that can be put in the data collection activity itself. For us, what the way that it started was with understanding what is it that we exactly want to measure for a household. So simply put, it was more of a, like, economics wise, it was more of an input output analysis, what all goes into the household and how exactly are they spending that money. So we spent a significant amount of time trying to understand what would be good enough proxies for us to pick up. So, for example, given the fact that income in rural areas is often seasonal, it's very difficult to ask somebody how they would estimate their gross annual income, which is a very important factor to understand if you want to understand the socioeconomic status of the household. So, in order to circumvent that, what we did was we looked at consumption as a proxy, because that's something that's more easily available. That's a more numerically accessible data for your head, because you know every month how much money you have to spend. So on an average, and you also have an allied theory for it. So it was not something that we thought of by ourselves. We have the consumption smoothing theory, which basically says that over a period of time, your consumption is more or less going to be constant. So if your present consumption is going to increase, you would borrow from the future. Or if your present income is much higher, you're going to save more in the future. So given a period of time, your average consumption is more or less going to be constant. So that's what we decided to track. That's what we decided to get data on. Um, Alongside that, we also wanted to create a very solid energy profile for these households. So we just didn't want to understand their firewood usage. We wanted to understand their firewood usage across different activities, because that's very important in understanding what is the area in which you would want the intervention. So at the same time, because understanding how many kgs of firewood that you're using every day is very difficult, a better way to measure that would be to understand for how long are they using firewood. So we use time as a factor to understand how energy consumption was in these areas. So most of the thought process that went behind the questionnaire that we were making, which almost spans across understanding about 400 different parameters for households. We spent a lot of time understanding what would be the best possible question to ask for us to proxy a particular piece of information, so that we get as close to understanding those particular parameters as possible. So that was a very important aspect. Apart from that, the point that Aniket mentioned about incomes and firewood consumption, that was a very important part of our inquiry. So we didn't really look at it in an extremely linear aspect. Instead, we employed statistical techniques that would give us different baskets of firewood consumers and then understand their profiles individually. So as you go from the lowest possible time consumer of firewood to the highest possible time consumer of firewood, what are the different parameters that define these groups? And in that homogeneity of consuming, say, firewood for about 1 hour every day, what are the different factors that are affecting the households who would have that level of consumption? So that's the perspective with which we analyzed our data. Of course, there was a lot of psychological data as well, which so like we never really analyzed the economics data in isolation. It was always in composition with the psychology data that we had, because we didn't want to do a separate analysis on both. The two kind of work well with each other. So that's also one of the perspectives that we had when we were getting on with analyzing the data.
So Pooja, just for people to understand that when a project like this is being done, and it looks simple because the water heater that we are talking about is not invented by us. These water heaters have been used for, I think, hundreds of years. They used to come in brass, in copper in the past, and I have seen in Gujarat, in several other states also. But somehow they've disappeared now, and people have moved to electrical. But as we know, India is not still electrified, and so there are a lot of populations who can't even afford a water heater, uh, uh, which will come to the cost and all that later. But so when you want to, so we also didn't have the water heater that we are right now talking about in our minds when we went in. So this is all an evolutionary process. So this is all that has happened after we started looking at the data, analyzing it, looking at it from multiple sectors, like you said, from economics, from psychological, and also from the actual consumption in terms of the impact on biomass, natural biomass. What is the kind of wood that is going out? What is the standing forest out there, and all that? So for something like this, there are, if you look at too small uh, an area or too small a sample, you may get a very skewed understanding of the actual ecosystem. By ecosystem, I'm talking about everything that's happening there in the space that we are in. So what is the kind of area that we're talking about, or so how many families, how many villages, how many parameters? Some A little bit on that will help people to understand that to come out with a solution, one has to do a study which is not too expansive so that it takes too long, but at the same time it cannot be too small because then it will not reflect the heterogeneity of the actual landscape. So what is that? I think it will be very interesting for people to understand, and that kind of effort needs to be put in before we come out with any interventions if we want a success.
Right. Absolutely. Like your data being skewed and your data being biased is every analyst's worst nightmare. So one thing that we definitely did, so this is something that we had anticipated, of course, as a part of in the process of designing the survey. So from the 49 villages that we had surveyed at about 25% the sample size, one thing that we definitely did was we made the sampling proportional to the composition or proportional to the caste composition of the population. So this made sure that we had representation from every single caste group that exists on our landscape, so as to not make the questionnaire skewed towards one particular caste group, so as to not enable what is called as elite capture in economics, which is basically where your surveyor would go to the house which is most likely to answer the questions really well, or who's the most extroverted, or who's the most outgoing. So in order to avoid all of those issues, we made sure that we had a set number in place about how many households we had to survey from each single caste group as well. And overall, we made it proportional to the population of that particular village. So every village's representation in our entire data set is proportional to the population of that village. So going by 49 villages, that gives us around a sample size of 2000. However, if you look at the 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 kind of data collection that we've done before, if you add up all of the households that we have across the landscape, because the project for water heater happened slightly later. We were first introduced to GTL as a landscape much before. So that gives us an understanding of about 8,000 households. And that this is across 400 parameters that we've collected for both psychology as well as economics, as well as to add to it, because that was still a more quantitative aspect of understanding the landscape. We also have Tamanna and Prachi, who did a lot of qualitative data collection. So the findings that we had, the ones that Aniket mentioned about incomes, the ones that were reflecting about increasing incomes leading to increasing firewood consumption, were also explored qualitatively. So it was not just the aspect that we had to remove bias from our data and from our understanding of the data was a very, very primary need that that we were working towards, and which is why we also moved to understanding those aspects qualitatively. Despite having a really large data set and despite running extremely um, like despite running slightly complex analysis on it, we didn't take the findings for granted. We were still looking at why those particular outcomes are being manifested qualitatively as well.
So just to give numbers, how many villages were sampled in the earlier data set where we are actually looking at the socioeconomics of that landscape? And then how many villages and households were sampled just when we were looking at a solution for water heating or whatever you call it?
So overall, the initial GTL landscape data is on
When you say
about
GTL, you are talking about the greater
greater
Tadoba landscape.
landscape.
It
Yeah.
means it is both Tadoba and all the territorial forests, forest developmental corporation areas outside of around Tadoba, right? So it's a much larger
Yeah.
landscape than Tadoba Tiger
Yeah.
Reservoir.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was across 142 villages. And we had done a 20% sampling for those set of villages. And then for the intervention specifically, we had around 49 villages wherein we had sampled for 25%.
Fine. And you said 400 parameters per household were collected.
Yeah. Yeah. For every single household, which includes information about their socioeconomic parameters, about their psychological parameters, as well as employment, asset holding, land holding, livestock, urban aspirations, like Aniket said. So whether they have things like TV, mobile phones, what is their frequency of recharging them? What is their frequency of getting uh, having a cable TV? So smaller aspects like that as well were covered.
Okay. So this is a good time to segue into the psychology aspect of what we were doing, because let me tell you that a lot of studies are done on the socioeconomics across several states, several districts. They have been carried out for decades. Um, but not many studies focus on the psychology or the behavior of people. Increasingly, people are seeing and understanding the importance of that. So I would now bring in our psych expert on the team, and that's Prachi Paranjpe. Prachi, welcome. I would like you to take the audience through a kind of a journey as to why you think it is important to look at human populations with the lens of psychology, and also a little bit before you go there, difference between clinical and social psychology. I think it's important for people to also understand the difference there and why it's important to understand social psychology.
Thank you, Anish. Yeah, clinical psychology is basically therapy oriented, where therapy is given to people who have clinical disorders, and the clinical psychologist always works with a psychiatrist So, say depression, ADHD, therapy given to people who are suffering from depression and ADHD is given by a clinical psychologist who works with a psychiatrist. And then there is counseling psychology, which is one-on-one therapy, uh, which is not disorder oriented, but it's given one-on-one. And then comes industrial psychology, which is basically in industry, where work motivation, where occupation related things are considered. And then comes social psychology, which is primarily research oriented, where an individual is understood from a society's perspective, and how a society affects an individual and how an individual affects society. That's a study of society and its interaction. So social psychology studies that. So as you had asked about why it's important to study psychology in this landscape, is because, as these guys said, that there is perception involved, there is a lot of anger. So basically, these villages are located in a very challenging area, challenging as per their daily interaction with carnivores and with all wild animals, and also their day-to-day struggles that they have, which is not only limited to say the carnivore, but also with climate change. Like for example, right now they're sowing a lot of crop, but they don't have that much outcome out of it, and there are various like reasons responsible for it. Maybe there is crop depredation due to animals, but since we know it's been raining it's been raining continuously, and they don't get crops. So when your basic need is dependent on your crop that you're growing, your sustenance is dependent on that, and when that is unstable, it's going to uh, it's going to involve a lot of anger, frustration within yourself, and you're not going to distinguish it between two things, like jungle is one and nature is another. You're not going to distinguish all of it like separately. So in your head, you're always going to get frustrated, get angry, and you would want to not have these parts around you. Like as these guys said, that there is going to be in like the emotion of injustice, the perception that you are suffering and people are enjoying their life for what they can. And again, a lot of anger against the forest department, a lot of um, like a lot of built up anger against people who come from urban settings. and and in spite of all of this, the wonderful thing is that there is still a tiger, and there are still people. Like every day, if my crop is getting eaten by say a deer, there are still deer, like which is wonderful, which makes it very important to understand that in spite of such built up anger, in spite of such uh, being treated so unfairly, these people are still living there, these people are uh, still there, and so are the animals, which makes it very interesting to understand these behaviors. And a small part where psychology is like one area where I believe psychology is very important is because um, you see these communities, and you we misunderstand these communities for something like a collectivist community, because we have that lag that people who live around forest are communities which are collectivist communities. But in psychology, we also study their attitude, their group behavior, which tells us an understanding about whether these communities are collectivist or individualistic. And as Aniket said, that we're moving towards a semi urban setting, and these psychological traits and these psychological behavior just gives a more wholesome view to how trait wise people are also changing. It's not just by the assumption that because they have a TV they have changed. It's also how these things affect their trait, and when you understand their trait, you can customize what sort of things they need, and what sort of things do they think are problems. That's where I think it becomes a
So,
little
yeah,
wholesome.
it's, I mean, seems very logical, but as you know, that there are 1.35 billion people in India, and each individual is different. We all have our likings, our dislikes. Uh, we have our different levels of frustration triggers. So you are looking at a very complex area. Basically, human mind is extremely complex. As you say, aspirations. It's all of it to feel deprived, to feel jealous. So when you have just one individual, it's very difficult to understand how is it that how is it that uh, when you are actually looking at this kind of a population where we are looking at thousands and thousands of people, can you be very objective when you're doing, because it seems like it's a very fluid subjective field, right? So how do you take what you get in terms of data and then convert it into a palatable outcome which can then help uh, make those changes on the ground so that people benefit. So that's I mean it's very interesting, but you have, I think, if you can explain it in about 3 or 4 minutes, it will be fantastic.
Okay. So yeah, you're right. Like every individual is different, but again, when it comes to things that are affected due to an external, like say in group and like in group and out group. So say there are things that are going to be affected because of a social surrounding, then the effect of that thing is going to be similar. So the questions, like the way we collected data, it was not yes or no. It was on a Likert scale. So where people could
What is the Likert
say,
scale?
Likert scale is a 5-point scale where it starts from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So it's strongly agree, neutral, disagree, and strongly disagree. So it's on a 5-point spectrum. So when you ask people what do they feel about one thing, then when their answers are from a 5-point Likert scale, you get an idea from a entire population where do they lie. So that's where the frequency, with the frequency you can tell that like which emotion is stronger. Like you can't objectively say that I'm angry, yes or no. Like that's not how humans can also respond. So that's how with large data, what helps with like large data is that whatever answers that you get, like the larger the sample, the robust the outcome is going to be, because people are going to give their opinions, and because of the frequency it helps us uh, see that what event leads to what sort of emotion. And as Pooja also said, that we've also collected a lot of qualitative data along with quantitative data. So in the qualitative data, uh, we've focused on, of course, the state that they were in, but also the traits that they have, also the emotions that they have faced, where are where it's not only about it was also using cues like what did they feel about a certain incident further, that gave us that gives a concurrent outcome to the quantitative data. So that's how you can actually see the outcome, if it
Okay, I think
makes sense.
we will come to this again,
Okay,
but I think it's very interesting in the way the problem was actually approached. So thank you, Prachi. I think it's time now to move from our homes into Brahmapuri division, and therefore this is the right time to bring in Tamanna, who has spent several months actually. She has actually lived with people in that landscape to understand their day-to-day challenges, the way they are dependent, their culture. So Tamanna, first of all, I just want to know, from a researcher's perspective, what was that experience for you? You have obviously worked in rural areas in the past as well. How so if I ask you a question as to uh, how much did you enjoy uh, spending those months interacting with people in Brahmapuri? I would start with that actually.
Uh, Hi Anish. So basically, yes, I did get the opportunity to spend a lot of time on field. Apart from all the data that was collected, I was also involved in going and interviewing people along with Prachi. And then also spoke to them a lot. We had FGDs, we had interviews. Then I went on to stay with them. Prachi also actually stayed with me in some of these villages. So, the highlight would be the warm and welcoming feeling that you get. These are people that I have never met in my life before. These are people, the complete strangers. And even then they were so warm and nice to me, and they let me stay at their home, treated me, and like a special guest, and took really good care of me. So apart from all the work and everything that we do, just the connect with the people, the warm and welcoming feeling that you get is something different. So yeah.
So yeah, I think these are the goodies that we work for. So we do what we do, but these are the welcome byproducts. I think we grow as human beings when we spend time with people who live a life which is far, far, far more difficult, inconvenient, health-wise stressful. In many ways, for a person who lives in a big city like Bombay, to actually go and spend some time in these rural areas where
Yeah, I mean,
the,
yeah, I mean, we were all sitting in Bombay in our office thinking about what data to collect, what variables to collect the data on, how we'll execute it and everything. And then, when you actually go on field, meet the people, there is, the complete picture that you see. It's not just that we are sitting in Mumbai and thinking about it while we are disconnected from the field. We also, all of us in fact, spend a lot of time on field in understanding the landscape, in understanding the people. In fact, the entire survey also was designed after multiple field visits made, after speaking to people, and then we noted down whatever parameters that needs to be collected. So it's a lot of back and forth that all of us have done in terms of this entire project, in terms of collecting data and understanding.
so if you can explain your role in this project and the challenges that you faced to remove biases, because once you live there, obviously you start having a notion about them. They react to you differently. How do you manage to collect data when you are actually part of the family? Those are also quite challenging.
Yes, it is actually. I mean, you have to be as objective as possible. Like it's not like a museum visit. You are part of that setting, so you have to sit and chat with them, understand them, while also making objective notes about what they are saying, where they are coming from. uh, so when we stayed in the villages, in the evenings or in the mornings, when the women would sit and cook on their chulas, we would be sitting chatting with them, talking to them about their day and everything, but at the same time observing what they are doing, observing how they are cooking, observing different aspects of their daily lives, while still being a part of it. So yes, there is that dual role that you have to play. But yeah, and it's also the fact that it is a bit challenging to stay on field also sometimes, but the people really make you feel comfortable and take good care of you. So because Marathi was again something, it's not my native language, but the amount of time that I spent on field, the amount of time I spent in these villages, I picked up the language there. And there used to be times where communication would be there was some issues, but I think eventually that also was something that I could overcome. But overall, otherwise, as Aniket, Pooja, and Prachi have highlighted, so we started with trying to understand the landscape. We started with collecting data about different, variables. we didn't start with a specific goal of working on the water heater or anything like that. So we started on to understand the problem, and after the data was analyzed, after those quantitative data was collected, analyzed, we got the results. We also did a qualitative survey where Prachi and I went and interviewed people and spoke to them. So to understand the effects of income on firewood, to understand how they use different mixes of fuel consumption, even the fact that a lot of them have received LPG, but what is their perception about LPG? Like, we know from our data that 39% of firewood consumption has reduced because of the use of LPG. But how is that playing out? How do people actually see LPG? How do they use LPG? Like, in our interviews, we found out that the in general perception that people see it as unaffordable, the fact that they ration out each cylinder, like they use it so that it lasts them 2 to 3 months, because refilling it is still expensive for them. So all of these findings were also something that we got from these interviews, which gave us a wholesome picture. And after that, I mean, from our data also, we found that water heating is one area where LPG is not substituting, firewood consumption. Like, we know that LPG is substituting firewood consumption for cooking, but not for water heating. And even when we went on to do the interviews, we came across the same results from these interviews.
Wow, very interesting. Any particular incident that is etched in your mind through this study, and in terms of your interactions with villagers? I think people would love to know if when you sample, and how do you make sure that you talk to people from all walks of life inside a village as well, because oftentimes it depends. You may sample, if, as Pooja mentioned, that sampling was also spread across people from different economic status, castes, etc., etc. But when you're there, how is it that there can be times when you get pulled into a situation, and that you collect data, but then eventually when you look at it from when you're analyzing it, how do you cut the data so that you can minimize the errors that can seep in because of homogeneity forced by a particular study design?
So there are multiple things that we did. Like, the first thing is, when you go to a village, you spend some time in actually understanding the setting of the village, understanding the demography of the village, understanding the various caste groups, number of people, land holding, landless, and all of that different mixes that we go and meet the head of the village and or the Anganwadi worker, or multiple of these people, not just one source. So you go and understand the structure of the village, and then decide that, of course, like for the quantitative, the surveys that we did, we tried to ensure that we collect data from different caste groups also, so that our data is not skewed. The other thing is, in terms of sampling, what generally with qualitative data we do is that you keep on collecting interviews and taking data until you reach your saturation. Like, there's no much of variation amongst the data that you are now beginning to get. So that's when we stopped. So multiple of these points were used to ensure that we don't get biased or skewed answers from our evaluations.
Thanks, Tamanna. I would like to go back to Aniket and ask him to summarize the way this project metamorphosed from how it looked at more than 150 villages in Brahmapuri to finally deciding on this landscape, and the kind of research that went in, and then finally the decision of zeroing down onto a water heating system. So Aniket, over to you.
Yes, so I think it's a very pertinent question because 1.5 years is where we identified the solution and started a rollout. It was nearly 3 years before that, so 4.5 years as a whole that the project is ongoing, and that really gives a glimpse into the kind of time required to design these kind of interventions. And one of the reasons that is the case is, like as Tamanna highlighted, there's a lot of back and forth because every time there was a question that we were stuck on, then the way to go was actually collect data, go back to the field and collect data, design a study, go back to the field, collect data on that question, then find the answer. And that was the process that was followed. That is the process that we have grown up like seeing at WCT, and that was the process that was followed. So which meant that even simpler stuff like between solar water heater and the bumper, what is it that the people prefer? What is their willingness to pay 1,500 rupees in one go, or 1 or 2 rupees per bucket? Or do they prefer a common property resource or an individual resource, an individual heater or a common heater? So there was a bunch of questions kept arising at each point, like why water heating? Once we realized that water heating is not being reduced by LPG, then what are the facets of water heating? That again was answered on the field. So every time that this process was repeated, there was a lot of back and forth till a point that we came down to the intervention that we wanted to finally roll out. In fact, amidst this, like when we presented to the then Finance and Forest Minister Sudhir Mungantiwar, he followed it up with installing certain solar. So we were also monitoring that too. So as we are doing the Bamba and monitoring the Bamba and its implications, we are also monitoring what happens to with a common property and a solar water heater. So the idea is that it's a process, and it's always an ongoing process. So you get more data and you have a more robust conclusion, but then you keep learning, and that has been the journey. Like Prachi and Pooja failed to mention that a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms that both of them extensively use to reach these conclusions. So it was not just pure statistical modeling, but a lot of computational techniques that have developed that have really helped. Because as with psychology, and you mentioned the variance in psychology, each 90 questions were like reduced to 12 variables, and these variables, the reduction methodology was actually unsupervised machine learning. So machine learning pointed out to which variables go together, and when multiple questions answer the same variable, the measurement becomes more robust, and that is how we ensure stability. And as Pooja mentioned, that supervised machine learning algorithms allowed us to classify between income quartiles behavioral differences. So, like unlike a linear model, which will give you the same drivers for a similar model, supervised machine learning algorithms allowed us to kind of pinpoint subgroups, and that for a country like India, which is so diverse, is extremely important. So all of these facets had to come together to allow us to execute this project. And of course, we had exceptional partners that helped us do this.
Thanks, Aniket, for bringing up the importance of technology, and that when you are dealing with large data sets, it's impossible to analyze that without using the fundamentals of machine learning. And so, Pooja, just for the benefit of the audience, can you pull up a screen so that you can explain in brief the kind of output that you got and the way you analyzed and arrived at a particular conclusion from there? We don't need to go in great detail, but for people to understand the kind of the work that goes on once you collect data. Collecting data is extremely important. Removing bias while collecting the data is very important too. However, that alone cannot come up with a solution or an idea. So how do you bridge the data that you collected with the final output in terms of the recommendations that you make for a particular issue? I think that's very important, and I would like you to just run through a typical regression tree so that people understand how it's done.
Okay. So, right, like the way that Aniket had mentioned about supervised learning, one of the things that we did was we basically realized that there is no there is no way in which we can homogenize all of our population into one group. So even when it comes to understanding income and energy consumption, and the fact that increasing incomes is going to lead to increasing energy consumptions, it's still going to happen in different pockets because we are a largely heterogeneous society. It's very difficult to straitjacket something which is so complex socio-economically into one model itself. So what we did was we tried to understand what these different subgroups were. So I'm just going to share an output of what is called as a regression tree. It's basically a technique that we used to understand what are the different firewood usage groups. So that's what the title of the graph says, and this is sort of the output that you get as a result of it. What it shows is that it depicts a tree, and at every single node of this tree you have one variable which is associated with or which affects firewood consumption, and the specific threshold at which this particular variable has been cut at. The way to read it would be that if you look at the small boxes right at the end, those are the individual groups of households that we have, which are consuming firewood at varying degrees. So you have something as low as 0.33 minutes per person. These are per individual measurements. The reason why we've done that is because obviously if we took it at a household size, then at a household level, then a higher household size would affect these consumption measures. So we did it for every single individual in the area. And what that told us is that for households where on an average an individual is using about 0.33 minutes of burning 0.33 minutes of firewood, which is comprising of about 6% of our overall data. The factors that would affect it would include things like LPG, whether the household has LPG or not. And because that is something that's right at the top of this tree, it's basically the deciding factor for how much firewood you would use. So if you have access to LPG, that's automatically leading to substitution in using firewood for cooking, and therefore a reduction in it. So that's a very important aspect of that ends up reducing firewood consumption. Then of course you have other factors like what is the education level, or how many education years have women in the household who are above 16 years of age, so who are basically also your decision makers, who are individuals who are actively involved in using firewood. What is the level of education that they have attained? Then you have factors like the income of the household, which, like I had mentioned earlier, is their monthly consumption expenditure. Interestingly, one of the very really interesting finds that we got is that if a household has TV, then their energy consumption reduces. And that ultimately points out to the fact that irrespective of whether it's firewood or LPG, their overall energy consumption was reducing. Therefore, entertainment was leading to conservation in a way. And that was a really interesting finding for us, which also feeds into the urban aspirations aspect that Aniket had spoken about earlier. So the reason why we use a technique like this is because we believe that all of the factors that we had collected data on almost intermingle with each other. It's not one factor that stands out and affects firewood consumption in isolation. And because they intermingle with each other, you get these different groups of consumption that there are.
Thanks, Pooja. Obviously, people who want to know these things in greater detail can always look at the research papers that have come out of this study. Some of those are available on our website. They're also available with the team, and you can write to individuals and they can send the papers to you. Most of all the data that is collected, we have ensured that it is common source and that it is available to people to use. And so we will be happy to talk to people who are interested in knowing how they can approach issues that they are dealing with at the cross section of conservation and communities. in different organizations. So now, as you can see, it looks simple, but it is the process is not so simple. It is quite complex. It is, I would not say lengthy. It deserves quality time if you want to have a long lasting impact on the ground. And so the water heater per se, as we now know, is not only substituting the usage of firewood, but it will also start impacting the health of the people, because obviously the less amount of wood you burn, the less smoke it generates, and that obviously impacts the lungs and the health of the people who are inhaling that air. And above all, a solution like this plays a big role in reducing the time an individual spends in the forest collecting a common resource like fuel wood or firewood. And that has a direct implication on the interaction between people and wild animals. And so, what was planned to, so the plan was to see how we can substitute firewood, so that use of firewood, so that people have more time, so that they can utilize that time to improve their livelihood options that they have, also improve their health. But it doubles up as uh, a mitigation measure for reducing the interaction between large carnivores and people. So when you do an intervention, you should also look at the adjacencies. So rather than just focusing on one aspect, if you have a broader view, you will be able to tackle several problems with one solution. Now, I would like to go back to Prachi. In fact, um, Prachi's work is very interesting. If I had more time, I would definitely go and accompany her on her surveys. So, Prachi, what was a typical day like for you? And anything that you want to mention which became an extremely important aspect for the team when they were viewing this the issue at hand, which is to provide substitute to firewood usage.
Um, okay. It will be amazing if you join me, and which means that I will also get to join you. So that's a win-win. And so basically, a typical day would be. I would like to give an example of when Tamanna and I were doing qualitative data, qualitative interviews. So it would be just like going early in the morning before villagers would start their typical work, where they would start to go on their farm. So we have to meet them really super early in the morning. So Tamanna and I would go really early in the morning when both of us were sleepy, but the ride would wake us up. So we would sit and collect data. And what really helped was that my perspective was obviously perception, attitude, and their emotions, whereas which is why the questions that, so I was looking at the whole situation from a very attitude, behavior, perception point of view, whereas Tamanna was looking at it from more their state, their culture, and what they and their typical day-to-day things. So the collaboration with Tamanna's understanding and psychology was very nice to get a wholesome picture. And if you would say one thing that would definitely help or brought in a different perspective from psychology perspective, like from the psychology point of view, will definitely be the perception of villagers about everything. Like because perception tells us how will they adopt to a new thing. Perception tells us about why will they not adopt, why will they adopt, which is why I think, and perception as a, I would like to use perception as a large broad term, because it involved a lot of things, like how they perceive the forest, how they perceive the forest department, how they perceive urban people, how they perceive each other. So I think studying their perception was a very important and a game changing factor according to me.
So, what was the length of a day, typical day, and how many interviews can one do in a day so that you can maximize, yet you won't that fatigue doesn't set in. And the duration of the interviews also, I think, are important, because people, the quality of data suffers when you overdo certain things. So what are those limits?
The interview was for an hour, and like an hour minimum. If they're sharing extra things which are not relevant to, like not directly relevant to what we're collecting, what we're trying to measure, we would still let them talk, because it's important. You don't know what aspects would at the end of the day intertwine, and what will make sense to you later on. So we would, it was minimum for an hour, and it would go on to perhaps 2 hours. Like, I think 1 or 2 interviews have gone to 2 hours, but primarily it would go to an hour. And we would collect information, we would collect data for about 4 to 5 interviews per day, because the time was less, because we don't want to take their day. They have, like, their day has to go on. So once it's time for them to go on field, they have to go on field, and they come back pretty late, so it gets dark. So at the end of the day we could fit in 2, and in the morning we could fit in 2 interviews. So it would be like 4 interviews, and afternoon of transcribing the data, and then going back in the field, because afternoon is where they are also on their field.
Thanks, Prachi. I think I would now want to bring in Pooja once again, because both you, Prachi, and Pooja uh, also accompanied the villagers as they went out um, to do the routine work, which could be walking, going to the field, all that means for the agriculture part of it, or going into the neighboring areas to collect minor forest produce or whatever. So how are those, and how is that important?
So, so data wise, the reason why that is important is because you get to understand how distances and time is being perceived. Especially when you are basically asking them to um, estimate data for how long they are collecting firewood, in order to gauge how much of it is being collected. What going with these three women actually, to the forest to collect firewood, helped us understand is the sheer amount of effort that it takes. It's absolutely tiresome. It is something that you would perhaps also not take into consideration the geography through which they have to walk. So there were, of course, a lot of undulations. There was a little bit of climbing up and climbing down. I'm not an athletic person, so I was almost giving up in the process. But I feel both of us was a big eye opener, because it gives you a realization of the data in the way that you see 2 kilometers as a number, but then you walk those 2 kilometers and you see somebody having that bigger head load on their head walk those 2 kilometers. It automatically changes what that number means for you. And because largely I have been somebody who's been looking at data, that for me put in things in perspective when I was looking at it, because I would automatically not then look at 2 as a small enough number, because that number comes with a lot of effort. Um, it comes with having to do serious physical labor. So it's not a small number by any measure. Additionally, we also learned that going and collecting firewood is a very good time to gossip about everybody. And so we got to know a lot of gossip about somebody's mother-in-law, and that other woman who's not being nice and she's just constantly quarreling. We also realized that when they are actually collecting firewood, they call to each other, because that's a way in which you can make sure that the other person is safe. Largely because
Safe
it's not
from?
very
Safe from?
safe from animals, safe from any other any issue that can happen while you're cutting firewood. Say if they are injured in the process, or dehydrated maybe not, but definitely injured. And it's that was something that I hadn't seen before, or I hadn't thought of before. So for me, it gave the words firewood collection a lot more context, a lot more understanding, a lot more behavioral aspects being attached to it. So it was not just one activity. There were a lot of things that it encompassed.
So now I think we must talk about the Bumber that we are talking about, because finally all this science, all the data crunching, all the machine learning, all those dead ends, all those innovative ideas, all those, and the amalgamation of several partners who pitched in the shortcomings because of weather, season, obviously pandemic. So there are so many different factors that have gone through, but finally all the work that you people have put in uh, has taken shape of what you see on the ground today, and that the film is about that product, which has been accepted wholeheartedly by the communities. And so I would like to bring in Aniket here to just talk about those times when you and Rishikesh actually zeroed down on this particular model. And then after Aniket, I would want Tamanna to come in, because I want her to emphasize the kind of the plan and the strategy that was used to ensure that Bumper doesn't become a top-down activity, or a activity that we want uh, to succeed because of subsidies. So we wanted to make it as organic as possible. So I want Tamanna to talk about that, because that's very, very important. Because knowing that what you are suggesting will definitely work, because there is so much of data that points towards this direction. However, how you guys wanted to clean the slate, so to say, and then go back into the village to see how that the acceptance of something that you think will work is far more organic than it could have been. So first Aniket, and then Tamanna.
So, as I said, that there's a lot of back and forth. So we realize that water heating is the area of intervention. That is where the push, the subsidy. So it basically will be maximally utilized to shift the household away from firewood. Then of course we had solar and this Bumper, which were two technologically possible solutions. It was obviously discussions with you, Anish, and Rushikesh, that we thought that Bumper is a very good solution in terms of the fact that it does not drastically change the villager side of things. So they are used to their chula and the burning. That behaviorally it does not change a lot of things, but is up to 90% more efficient. So also the other key important element of the Bumper was that it's a like a sustainability dependence design, where the community continues to be dependent to some extent on the firewood. So if that can be at a sustainable level, because the moment the community does not need firewood at all, then the forest land becomes a resource that they will be appealing to them. So it should not lead to an incentive for them to clear out the forest for land. So that is also a key element that one has to understand while choosing a technology. So that is how the Bumper was chosen. In this, we actually went to vendors in Anand as well as Sangli, visited like up to 10 vendors, 5 at each place, to check who can deliver the quantity and the quality. Uh, that is how we zeroed in on our current vendor, the Vijay Industries, and they were zeroed in also because they customized it to our needs, the height, the quantity of water, 30 liters. That was also decided in terms of optimizing the cost. So the cost had to be minimized, but the quantity had to be optimal. And all of these small inputs of Tamanna, Prachi, Puja, where they had stayed with the villagers, so meant that at every point when we were say sitting with the vendor in designing an optimal quantity, it helped us because we knew that what is their need, what is the way in which they use it, and so all of that really helped. and then it was over to the communication campaign, which was designed by data. And that was something that really made sure that it got communicated to the people, because it's not just good enough to design, but it's important to go ahead and communicate that to the people, and that is what the communication strategy ensured.
So basically, once we had zeroed in on the bumper as an intervention, we immediately got to designing the campaign around the communication campaign for the bumper, because uh, as we see that just directly going to the villagers talking about it without any plans wouldn't have had the same reach. And also the fact that we were dealing with something like firewood, which people think is anyways freely available, so they can just go to the forest, collect firewood and use it in their chulhas. So we had to be very smart about the entire campaign. So the bamba as a concept in itself is not, as you had mentioned earlier, not very new. It's something that is being used in the hills, in the konkans, everywhere. So it's like just a desi technique that has been around, which even in our area, when we were speaking to people about water heating before the bamba was launched, there were references about some other models that people have developed locally. So when it came to designing the campaign, the one thing that we strictly kept in mind was the fact that we will not campaign it around or position it around as saving the forest or saving wildlife. Because from our studies, from our interactions, one thing that we really understood is that there is some amount of anger towards the forest or the forest department. And the moment you start a conversation from, say, saving the wildlife, saving the forest, you are already alienating the people. You're not talking about them. So like as we have discussed, the bamba is not just about saving or reducing forest degradation, but it is also reducing the efforts of the people going to the forest in terms of their time also, all, and the fact that using the chulhas also is affecting their health. So all of these things were kept in mind, and then we used the data that we have, especially the psych data that we had, to design this campaign. So the steps that we followed is, when the first thing that we did is we designed all these posters and communication material, posters and banners that were put up in these villages in every corner, which basically described the basic aspects of the bamba, what a bamba is, because this concept was fairly new to that area. So we had to first inform the people about it. So it's in terms of the fact that it doesn't use electricity. You can use your household waste or the agricultural waste and use it to heat water for your entire family. And so we did go around the village. Our field team, along with all of us, were involved in this process. Kishore, who is a part of our team, helped us extensively in communicating and engaging with the villagers and communicating all the benefits. In fact, the audio recordings, I hope if people have heard it in the trailer clippings, the bamba 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 audio was used in the villages for the promotion, which were a huge hit. Like every time you would go to the village, people were just singing bamba bamba bamba. So it was something that had hooked on the people, and created some amount of interest and curiosity. So what we were hoping was to start off with creating that interest and curiosity amongst the people. What is this thing? Like, we didn't go and tell them buy it, isse tumhe fayda hoga, or all of that. We just went and showed them there is something called the bamba, which you can use to heat water. And we strategically didn't start with how much the price is or all of that, because first you need to show the people what that product is, what it is about. And then later on, after going to the villages, putting up these banners, posters, we had a cycle on which we would play the Bamba audio clipping throughout the village with some jingles that we had used in it. So after all of that, the villagers themselves demanded that we would like to see this product, see how it functions. So we organized a village demonstration. So it wasn't that we conducted one demonstration for a village. Like, the sizes of these villages were very different. So we ensured that every family and every corner was covered. So we would have, say, multiple 2, 3, 4, 6, depending on the size of the village, those many demos. In the evenings, when everybody is done with their work, they are back from the field. And then in the evenings, we would have these demos where we would show them with live demonstrations how what kind of fuels are used, the amount of time taken, and whether it really works or not. So I think the demonstration was also a very key aspect in all of it, so that the people themselves can see the piece, and then they were also left back in these villages so that they can try it out themselves for the next few days and see how it works. Then we went and recorded what their responses were, experiences were, and in fact they were left there in these villages till the time of the delivery. So like, it was the data collection and coming to designing of the program was one bit, like zeroing in on the intervention was one bit, but the entire process of the campaign, the designing of the campaign for the Bamba itself was a huge process.
Wow. I mean, I have obviously seen that happen, but it's what it means is that there are no shortcuts. No shortcuts in doing science, no shortcuts in collecting data, no shortcuts in analyzing it, no shortcuts in campaigning for it. And finally, even some bit about distribution. So how do you make sure that the logistics is smooth enough so that it's not cause so much of inconvenience to people? So can you just add a few sentences so that people understand that there was enough emphasis put and a lot of details were looked at before they actually were distributed amongst those people who wanted to buy them?
So basically that would perhaps start from the manufacturers and right from transportation. So to ensure that they reach the villages safely without being damaged, because they were being manufactured in Sangli and then being transported from Sangli to Chandrapur. So there was a lot of coordination that had to be done and discussion to ensure that they are transported safely, that each piece is there safely with every, so the Bamba is not just the Bamba, but it also has like caps and different parts of it. So to ensure that all of them are there and reach safely. So that is one bit. Then the other is that we collect, like during the registration, of course, we took details of the villagers about, the basic registration process of name, mobile number, Aadhaar number, all of that was taken. And a week before they were to reach the village, the villagers were informed that the Bamba is going to reach on so and so date, and the village body, the panchayat, were also informed. So all the local stakeholders were kept in loop about every step, and we would ensure and look for designated spaces where we could unload these Bamba safely and also carry out the distribution, because it takes some space. So all of that had to be looked after, then ensuring that we get people to unload it, because each Bamba is approximately 50 kg. So we had to get a lot of people to just unload it. That itself would take a lot of time to ensure that it is being unloaded properly so that none of the parts get damaged. So there were a lot of these finer details that had to be, the logistics of it had to be worked out. And of course, now because of COVID, we have to also ensure that they are disinfected, they are like people are there, not creating a lot of crowds. So all of that also has to be managed.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tamanna. I think you people should write up maybe a long, kind of a short book on how something like this is done, because I think it is a good learning for whoever is working in the field. It's not just about conservation, and it's not about communities. It's about an approach. So I urge you all to pen down something in a much greater detail, maybe in the form of a small book, which people can very light to understand, not going too much into analysis and stuff. But I think it will be a great thing for people. Now, so people have seen through the documentary that there has been a lot of response, not only from the villagers. Nearly 30% of the village has, decided to purchase the Bamba. Obviously, there are subsidies, but the villagers have put in 1/4 of the cost of the Bamba, which is a very big thing, and which also ensures that there is ownership. A project like this um, is a feather on the cap of the team that were involved, definitely. But something as complex as this cannot just be done by one organization. So I would like to bring in Aniket to talk about the kind of partnerships that we forged over the last 4.5 years to make sure that something like this, that we see what we see right now. Aniket,
Yes.
back to you.
So yeah, as Anish, you rightly put it, that this project of this magnitude, where you have reached 30% of all the villages that we have approached, is just not possible without our partners. We have had excellent partners throughout the beginning from HTPF and the funding. So what we have in HTPF is a reliable funding partner that backs us to do the science and then deliver. So they had a lot of patience with the academic, like the scientific results, and they backed us throughout till it borne fruit. So like as you say that there is no replacement to hard work and process, but you need a funder that backs you through that, and that is HT Parekh Foundation has reliably proven to be that and continues to be that today. Then beginning from anybody we approached, like we approached Rasmus Hedberg at the World Bank for some of the measurements of energy. Energy profiling was a very key element of this, and we actually adopted the World Bank standards that they used for that, because after a review we felt that they were the best. So World Bank, Rasmus Hedberg at the World Bank is somebody that I need to mention. VSTF. So when it came to actually zeroing in on the intervention, once we understood the landscape, collected 3,000 households data of the landscape, we zeroed in on so some villages, and this happened because of the VSTF program, the Chief Minister's Fellowship, and through VSTF. So that is Village Social Transformation Foundation is another partner, and their fellows were in the villages when the rollout happened, who actually even helped with the on-ground rollout and other logistics on the ground. University of Mumbai has been a founding partner for the conservation behavior team, if I can call it that. A lot of us do come from the place, and Professor Vivek Belekar has been a very active part of this. He has been mentioned earlier, but it requires a psychologist of his experience, because applications of psychology to conservation is a very niche area, and a lot of the Western work is not cannot be directly superimposed on the Indian context, and that is where Professor Vivek Belekar has been excellent in kind of helping us through this. Shrikant Bharate, ex-World Bank, has been the partner for data collection right from the word go. He is instrumental in ensuring that the methodology, the sampling methodology, as well as the bias in questioning. So we train the surveyors for this, but making sure that the first and the 3,000 data point is the same is a challenge, and nobody Shrikant Bharate has been able to deliver that, and we cannot be more grateful about that. Center for People Social Forum has been the data collection partner. They kind of are the people who tie us up with the surveyors who go on the field. So Center for People Social Forum has been that partner that has allowed us this quantum of data collection. Lastly, Digvijay Industries and Milind Kulkarni, their partners, has been extremely crucial. In fact, because of COVID, but he was going to visit the latest distribution because he's been so involved in the program and he has gone way beyond his, call of duty as a manufacturer and actually covered us or, modified the design, beginning from modifying the design, but also whenever there is a specific, change or modification, he's been managed to shift his supply chain and, manufacturing processes to adopt for that. So, of course, the list is endless, but these are the major partners, and this could not have been possible without the untiring support and, just the willingness. Like, some of these people have always been available, and I think, the entire team will speak about it, that none of it, has been done as partners. They have always been on board as, stakeholders who have been as involved as we are. So we are extremely grateful for that.
Yes, so you can see that it is a joint effort of so many constituencies, so many partners, including the forest department, and above all the people who share their backyards with wildlife. So I would go back to Tamanna to to enlighten us as to how critical it was that both these stakeholders participated in this program wholeheartedly.
So yes, I think the people and the forest department are the two most critical stakeholders for the entire project. I would really want to thank the people for letting us speak to them, for giving us the time when they had so many other important things to do, but yet they gave us their time and gave us information. Also the fact that they let us stay with them, without any hesitation, despite us being complete strangers. And in the forest department also showed a lot of support for this project, a lot of interest, and they also came to our villages to see how the distribution was happening, what the responses of the villagers were. So they also showed their support throughout this project and allowed us to work in these villages and carry out the intervention. So another factor that in fact helped us scale the project was the fact that when we were designing the intervention, we ensured that it was not something that we would give out for free, but as mentioned earlier, we have kept 25% contribution of the villagers, so that there is some ownership of the villagers. And also largely because of the fact that generally when the government launches any scheme, or especially in our area, the forest department through Shama Prasad Mukherjee Yojana, generally the scheme, the ratio that is used is 25-75. So we wanted to stick to that, so that today we are rolling it out in a couple of villages, but tomorrow the ultimate aim was for the government, for the forest department and other agencies to take it up. So it was consciously designed such that it can be scaled up, the design of the scheme.
Yeah, a lot of data were collected when you were walking through those forests. And it's important that all the people understand, and most importantly, more number of partners strategically also increases the buy-in. So today, as we are, and you can see from the film that we have launched this, and more than 600 people have already bought it at a subsidized rate. But simultaneously, the forest department, who has been, who you have invited, you have in fact gone and made a presentation even in the Melghat Tiger Reserve. They have, after the discussion and after you guys gave the detailed process of how it was done, it didn't take them even 5 minutes to say that they want to try it out in their area. So today, as we are in Melghat, the field director, Mr. MS Reddy, is already thinking of introducing this not only in the villages but also in the protection huts, the anti-poaching camps, where they require hot water. Similarly, the Tadoba Tiger Reserve, which is well known for a very healthy tiger density, um, has shown a lot of interest. And as we speak, some of these water heaters have already been, they've decided to introduce them in some of the villages so that people get used to it exactly the same way as the families in Brahmapuri. It's a touch and feel of the water heater right in front of them. So what happens is, once you have stakeholders um, and partners, it always helps to scale the project, because India is about numbers. If you are only working in 5 villages or 20 villages, it is not, it will definitely help those people, the primary beneficiaries, but to have secondary beneficiaries, which means the wildlife and the forest, you need to talk about scale. And scale can only happen if you work in a larger group, so that people own their roles and also the project. So I think that also helps in a project like this. I think we reached the end of our discussion, and I'm very happy with the results. But this is just the beginning. We have to really scale it up, not only in Maharashtra, but if people think that it is useful, I think a lot of NGOs, the forest department, and people working with the communities can also look at solutions like this to reduce the interface between people and wildlife. Because today in India, there is a huge amount of loss to crops and also to human life and cattle because of the increasing interface. And simple solutions, but solutions that have been arrived at with very, very detailed analysis and study, will definitely together. So this is just one of the many solutions. So we have to collectively think about several such, so that we can reduce the interface. If the interface reduces, obviously the conflict will reduce too. So thank you very much for everybody to listen to the fantastic team of Wildlife Conservation Trust. If you have not watched the documentary yet, you can go on to our YouTube channel, as well as on any of our social media platforms, to view the documentary in 3 languages, that is English, Hindi, and Marathi. You can also find the links in the description or on the screen below. See you.